The fluorescent lights of Miller's grocery store buzzed overhead as 22-year-old Emma Rodriguez stood frozen in the baby formula aisle, her hands trembling as she counted the crumpled bills and loose change in her worn leather wallet for the third time. $12.37. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The same amount that had been there 5 minutes ago, and the same amount that wasn't nearly enough for the premium formula her 4-month-old son, Marcus, needed for his sensitive stomach. Emma's dark eyes darted nervously around the nearly empty store, checking if anyone was watching her moment of desperation. It was nearly closing time on a Tuesday evening, and most shoppers had long since finished their errands and returned to their warm homes. She envied them their certainty, their ability to grab what they needed without calculating every penny, without the constant knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her chest since Marcus was born. The baby formula she held in her hands cost $18.99. She had done the math countless times, hoping somehow the numbers would change, but mathematics remained stubbornly consistent. She was $6.62 short, and Marcus was down to his last bottle at home. Tomorrow was Wednesday, which meant she still had 4 more days until her next paycheck from the diner where she worked the morning shift, serving coffee and eggs to truckers and early commuters who barely looked up from their phones long enough to say thank you. Emma had always been shy, even before becoming a single mother had made her world feel impossibly small and overwhelming. In high school, she had been the girl who sat in the back row, who completed every assignment perfectly, but never raised her hand to speak. Teachers had written on her report cards that she was bright, but needed to participate more to find her voice. Now at 22, she felt like that voice had gotten even smaller, muffled by exhaustion, worry, and the constant fear that she wasn't enough for her son. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished linoleum floor. Her jeans were clean but faded, purchased from a thrift store 3 months ago when her pre-pregnancy clothes no longer fit properly. Her sweater, a soft blue that had once been her favorite color, now had a small stain near the hem from where Marcus had spit up during his afternoon feeding. She had scrubbed at it with dish soap until her knuckles were raw, but the mark remained, a constant reminder of how hard she was trying and how she always seemed to fall just short. The store's background music played a cheerful melody that felt mocking in the fluorescent-lit reality of her situation. Other customers moved through their shopping with purpose and ease, tossing items into their carts without checking price tags, without the mental calculations that consumed Emma's every grocery store visit. She watched a woman in yoga pants grab an expensive organic baby food without even glancing at the cost, and Emma felt a familiar pang of envy mixed with shame at her own jealousy. Marcus was at home with Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor who had become something of a guardian angel since Emma's mother had passed away 2 years ago. Mrs. Patterson never asked for payment for watching Marcus during Emma's work shifts, insisting that babies brought joy to her quiet apartment. Emma suspected the older woman understood more about her financial struggles than she let on, often showing up with extra groceries or a casserole that she claimed she had made too much of. The kindness was overwhelming sometimes, making Emma feel grateful and inadequate in equal measure. Emma's phone buzzed in her back pocket, and she pulled it out with one hand while continuing to grip the formula can with the other. A text from Mrs. Patterson. "Marcus is doing fine, but he's getting fussy. Might be hungry soon. No rush though, sweetie." Emma's stomach clenched. Mrs. Patterson was too polite to say that Marcus was crying for food, but Emma could read between the lines. Her son needed to eat, and she was standing in a grocery store counting coins like some character from a Dickens novel. She had been in this position before, though never quite this desperate. There had been the time she had to choose between buying diapers and paying the electric bill, ultimately deciding that candlelight was romantic and they could make do for a few days. There was the week she had eaten nothing but peanut butter sandwiches so Marcus could have enough formula. Each time, she had told herself it was temporary, that things would get better once she found a better job, once she got caught up on bills, once Marcus was old enough for daycare so she could work more hours. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like she was at the end of a rope that had been fraying for months. She had already called in sick to her evening housekeeping job because she couldn't afford gas to drive across town, and that lost income had put her in this impossible position. Tomorrow she would have to explain to her supervisor why she had missed her shift, and she wasn't sure her excuse would be believed or forgiven. The cleaning service had been understanding so far, but understanding had limits, and Emma was afraid. She was approaching hers. The logical part of her mind suggested she could ask to speak to the manager, explain her situation, see if there was some kind of payment plan or assistance program. But the thought of articulating her desperation to a stranger made her palms sweat and her heart race. What if they said no? What if they looked at her with pity or judgment? What if they asked questions she didn't want to answer about how she had ended up here, about Marcus's father who had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant, about her mother's medical bills that had consumed her small savings? Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to channel some of the strength she had found when Marcus was born. Labor had been long and difficult, and she had done it alone except for a kind nurse who held her hand and told her she was braver than she knew. In that moment, as she held her son for the first time, Emma had promised him that she would figure it out, that she would be enough, that love would somehow make up for all the things she couldn't provide. But love didn't pay for formula, and promises didn't fill empty stomachs. She opened her eyes and looked around the store again, noting that the checkout lines were nearly empty. The teenage cashier at Register 3 was scrolling through her phone, looking bored and eager for her shift to end. The manager, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, was stacking newspapers near the entrance. Emma had seen him before during her regular shopping trips, and he had always been polite, even when she had to ask him to remove items from her purchase, because she had miscalculated her budget. The store was scheduled to close in 20 minutes, and Emma realized she was running out of time to make a decision. She could put the formula back and hope that Marcus would be okay with the cheaper generic brand that might upset his stomach. She could ask Mrs. Patterson if she had any emergency formula, though Emma suspected her neighbor was already stretching her own budget to help them. She could call her supervisor and beg for an advance on her paycheck, though she had already asked for that favor twice in the past 6 months. Or she could do what her pride had been fighting against for weeks. She could swallow her dignity and ask for help. Emma looked down at the formula can in her hands, reading the nutrition label. For the 100th time, the pediatrician had been clear that Marcus needed this specific brand because of his digestive issues, and Emma had watched her son suffer through nights of crying and discomfort when she had tried to save money with alternatives. As a mother, her job was to provide for her child, to make sure he was healthy and fed and safe. Everything else was secondary. She walked slowly toward the checkout area, her sneakers making soft sounds against the floor. The teenage cashier looked up from her phone as Emma approached, offering a practiced smile that didn't quite reach. Her eyes, Emma placed the formula on the conveyor belt and then stood there, frozen by indecision and shame. The cashier scanned the item and the register displayed the total, $18.99. Emma opened her wallet again, knowing the amount hadn't magically increased in the past 10 minutes, and slowly counted out her bills and coins. $12.37, laid out on the counter like evidence of her inadequacy. The cashier looked at the money, then at Emma, then back at the money. Her expression shifted from boredom to confusion to something that might have been sympathy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She glanced around, perhaps looking for a supervisor or wondering if this was some kind of test. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassment flooding through her system like a fever. She wanted to disappear, to grab her pathetic pile of money and run out of the store, but Marcus needed formula and she was out of options. Her voice, when she finally found it, was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, her eyes fixed on the counter. "I know it's not enough. I was wondering if there might be some kind of payment plan, or if I could leave something as collateral and pay the rest tomorrow." The words felt heavy and shameful in her mouth. She had never asked for charity before, had never been the person who couldn't afford basic necessities. Even when her mother was sick and the medical bills were piling up, Emma had found ways to make ends meet through extra shifts and careful budgeting. But motherhood had changed everything, had made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. The cashier, whose name tag read Jessica, looked uncomfortable. She was probably no more than 17, likely earning minimum wage for a part-time job to help pay for college or a car. Dealing with desperate mothers asking for payment plans was probably not covered in her training manual. Jessica said, glancing nervously toward the manager's station. "I don't think we have anything like that. Maybe you could talk to Mr. Henderson. He's the manager." Emma nodded, though the thought of explaining her situation to yet another person made her stomach clench. She gathered her money from the counter, her hands shaking slightly, and walked toward where the manager was organizing the newspaper display. Mr. Henderson looked up as she approached, his expression shifting to one of polite attention. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of face that suggested he had teenage children of his own. Emma wondered if he had ever stood in a grocery store, counting coins and hoping for miracles. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice still barely audible. "I was wondering if I could speak with you about a payment arrangement." Mr. Henderson set down his stack of newspapers and gave her his full attention. There was something in his manner that was patient and kind, without the rushed efficiency that characterized most customer service interactions. Emma found herself able to breathe a little easier. "Of course," he said. "What can I help you with?" Emma explained her situation in halting sentences, each word feeling like a small surrender. She told him about Marcus, about the formula he needed, about being short on money until her next paycheck. She didn't mention her mother's medical bills or Marcus's absent father, or the constant fear that she was failing at the most important job she had ever had. Some stories were too long and too complicated for grocery store conversations. Mr. Henderson listened without interruption, nodding occasionally and never once looking at his watch or showing impatience. When Emma finished speaking, he was quiet. For a moment, considering her request. "Let me see what I can do," he said finally. "We don't usually have formal payment plans, but maybe we can work something out." Emma felt a rush of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. "Thank you," she whispered. "I really appreciate you even considering it." Mr. Henderson walked with her back to the checkout area, where Jessica was waiting with poorly concealed curiosity. The few other customers in the store were finishing their transactions at the other registers, and Emma was grateful that her moment of desperation wasn't being witnessed by a crowd. As Mr. Henderson began to explain the situation to Jessica, Emma became aware of someone approaching the checkout area behind her. She turned slightly and saw a man in expensive-looking coat waiting patiently in line, a single item in his hand. He was probably in his late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of posture that suggested confidence and success. Emma felt a new wave of embarrassment, knowing that this well-dressed stranger was witnessing her inability to afford baby formula. The man stepped closer, and Emma caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with something that smelled like leather and success. She tried to make herself smaller, to become invisible, but there was nowhere to hide in the bright, fluorescent lighting of the checkout area. Mr. Henderson was explaining to Jessica that they would need to hold the formula until Emma could return with the remaining money, and Emma was nodding gratefully even though she wasn't sure when that would be possible. Her next paycheck was still 4 days away, and Marcus would need formula before then. That's when the man behind her spoke, his voice clear and confident in a way that Emma envied. "Excuse me," he said, and Emma's heart sank, expecting him to complain about the delay or ask to use a different register. Instead, he continued, "I couldn't help but overhear. Would it be all right if I covered the difference?" Emma turned around fully, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. The man was looking at her with an expression that was kind but not pitying, concerned but not condescending. He was handsome in the way that successful people often were, with clear skin and good teeth and clothes that fit perfectly. "I'm sorry?" Emma managed to say, certain she had misunderstood. The man smiled, and it was genuine and warm. "The formula," he said. "I'd like to pay for it, if that's okay with you." Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to process this unexpected development. Strangers didn't just offer to buy baby formula for people they didn't know. There had to be some kind of catch, some expectation or hidden agenda. She had learned through hard experience that nothing in life was truly free. "That's very kind," she said slowly, "but I couldn't possibly accept that." The man's expression remained patient and understanding. "Can I ask how old your baby is?" The question caught Emma off guard. 4 months, she answered automatically. He nodded, and something in his expression shifted, became more serious. "My daughter Emma is 6 months old," he said. "And I know how important it is to have the right formula." Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The kindness of a stranger was somehow more overwhelming than she had expected. She had spent so long struggling alone, so determined to prove that she could handle everything by herself that the simple offer of help felt like a lifeline she was afraid to grab. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice shaky. The man extended his hand. "David Chun," he said. "And you are?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then shook his offered hand. "Emma Rodriguez." David's handshake was firm and warm, and Emma noticed that his hands were well maintained but not soft, suggesting someone who had worked for his success rather than inherited it. There was something about him that felt trustworthy, though. Emma's experience had taught her to be cautious about trusting anyone, especially men who seemed too good to be true. "It's nice to meet you, Emma," David said. "And I really would like to help, if you'll let me." Mr. Henderson and Jessica were watching this interaction with obvious interest, and Emma was acutely aware that she was holding up the checkout process. Other customers were beginning to form a line behind David, their expressions ranging from patient to mildly annoyed. Emma's mind raced through her options. She could continue to refuse, maintain her pride, and leave the store with nothing while Marcus went hungry. She could accept this stranger's generosity and deal with whatever feelings of inadequacy and indebtedness that might follow. Or she could find some middle ground, some way to accept help while maintaining her dignity. "I could pay you back," she said finally. "I get paid on Friday. I could meet you somewhere and give you the money then." David shook his head gently. "That's not necessary, really. Sometimes we all need a little help, and I'm in a position to provide it." Emma looked at him more carefully, taking in the expensive coat, the quality of his shoes, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than she made in a month. He was clearly wealthy, but there was something in his manner that didn't feel condescending or superior. If anything, he seemed almost nervous, as if he was afraid she would refuse his offer. "Why?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why would you want to help me?" David was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "Because someone helped me once," he said finally, "when I really needed it. And because I have a daughter, and I know that if I were in your position, I Would hope someone would do the same for my family." There was something in his voice when he mentioned his daughter that made Emma believe him. It was the same tone she heard in her own voice when she talked about Marcus, a mixture of love and protective concern that couldn't be faked. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat gently. "Emma, if you're comfortable with this arrangement, I can process the transaction now." Emma looked at the formula on the counter, then at David, then at the small crowd of customers that had gathered behind them. She thought about Marcus at home with Mrs. Patterson, probably crying with hunger by now. She thought about her dwindling options and her depleted resources and her pride that had been her companion for so long, but wasn't filling her son's stomach. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." David smiled and pulled out his wallet, extracting the credit card with the casual ease of someone for whom $18.99 was not a significant expense. He handed it to Jessica, who processed the transaction quickly and efficiently. Emma watched the receipt print, still feeling like she was in some kind of dream. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Strangers didn't appear in grocery stores offering to solve her problems. There had to be more to this story, some explanation for David's generosity that would make sense of this surreal situation. Jessica handed David his receipt and credit card, then bagged the formula for Emma, the transaction that had consumed Emma's thoughts and anxiety for the past hour was completed in less than 2 minutes. "Thank you," Emma said again, clutching the bag to her chest. "Really, I don't know how to thank you enough." David was putting his wallet back in his coat pocket. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just take care of your son." Emma nodded, tears threatening again. She had spent so many months feeling like she was drowning, like she was one crisis away from complete disaster. This small act of kindness felt like someone had thrown her a rope, even if she wasn't sure where it led. David picked up his own item, a single bottle of expensive wine, and moved toward Jessica to complete his purchase. Emma realized she should leave, should go home to Marcus and Mrs. Patterson, but something made her linger. She watched as David paid for his wine with the same casual ease with which he had bought her formula. As he was signing the receipt, David looked up at Emma, who was still standing nearby. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Emma nodded, curious. "Do you have reliable childcare for when you're working?" The question surprised Emma. "My neighbor watches him," she said. "She's wonderful, but I worry about imposing on her too much." David finished signing his receipt and put his copy in his coat pocket. "What do you do for work?" Emma hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about her jobs. "I work at a diner in the mornings, and I clean offices in the evenings, when I can get childcare." David nodded thoughtfully. "That must be exhausting." Emma shrugged. "It's what I need to do." There was something in David's expression that made Emma think he was considering saying something else, but instead he simply smiled and said, "Well, I hope things get easier for you." Emma thanked him again, and David headed toward the exit. Emma watched him go, noting the confident way he moved, the expensive cut of his coat, the sense that he belonged in a world very different from hers. Mr. Henderson approached Emma as she continued to stand there, holding her bag of formula. "Are you all right?" he asked kindly. Emma nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. I can't believe that happened." Mr. Henderson smiled. "There are still good people in the world," he said. "Sometimes they show up when you need them most." Emma left the store in a daze, the bag of formula clutched tightly in her hands. The parking lot was nearly empty, lit by tall sodium lights that cast everything in an orange glow. Her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a dent in the rear bumper, and a passenger door that didn't close properly, looked even more shabby in the artificial light. As she unlocked her car, Emma saw David getting into a sleek black sedan parked a few spaces away. Even his car spoke of success and stability. Everything Emma wanted for herself and Marcus, but couldn't seem to achieve. She wondered what David did for work, what his life was like, whether he went home to a beautiful house and a loving family who never had to count coins in grocery stores. Emma drove home through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, past the other modest apartments and small houses where people like her lived paycheck to paycheck, hoping for better days. The bag of formula sat on the passenger seat like a small miracle, proof that sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. Mrs. Patterson's apartment was on the first floor of Emma's building, a coincidence that had proved to be a blessing when Emma had moved in 6 months ago. Emma knocked softly on the door, not wanting to wake Marcus if he had finally fallen asleep. Mrs. Patterson opened the door with a smile, though Emma could see the tiredness in her eyes. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and gentle hands. That had raised 4 children of her own decades ago. She never complained about watching Marcus, but Emma knew it was physically demanding work for someone her age. "How's my sweet baby?" Emma asked, stepping into the warm apartment that always smelled like vanilla and old books. "He's been fussy," Mrs. Patterson admitted, leading Emma toward the living room where Marcus was lying on a blanket, making the soft fussing sounds that usually preceded full-blown crying. "I think he's hungry." Emma's heart clenched as she looked at her son, his tiny fists waving in the air as he worked himself up to a proper cry. She had been gone for almost 2 hours, dealing with her crisis in the grocery store while Marcus waited for food at home. "I have his formula," Emma said, holding up the bag like a trophy. "I'll get a bottle ready right now." As Emma prepared Marcus's bottle in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, she found herself telling the older woman about her encounter with David Chun. Mrs. Patterson listened with the patient attention she gave to all of Emma's stories, occasionally making encouraging sounds. "That was very kind of him," Mrs. Patterson said when Emma finished. "There are angels among us, dear. Sometimes they appear when we need them most." Emma tested the temperature of the formula on her wrist, then returned to the living room where Marcus was now crying in earnest. She picked him up, feeling the familiar weight of his small body against her chest, and offered him the bottle. He latched on immediately, his cries stopping as he began to eat. "There we go, sweet boy," Emma murmured, settling into Mrs. Patterson's comfortable armchair. "Mama got your formula. Everything's okay now." But even as she spoke the words, Emma knew they weren't entirely true. Tonight's crisis was solved, but there would be others. Tomorrow she still had to figure out how to pay her electric bill. Next week she still had to find a way to afford diapers and groceries. The fundamental problems of her life hadn't changed, even if a stranger's kindness had bought her a temporary reprieve. Marcus finished his bottle quickly, and Emma could see the contentment in his dark eyes as his hunger was satisfied. She burped him gently, then held him close, breathing in the sweet baby scent that had become her favorite smell in the world. In moments like this, when Marcus was fed and content and safe in her arms, Emma felt like she might actually be capable of being the mother he deserved. Mrs. Patterson had settled into her own chair, watching Emma and Marcus with the fond expression she reserved for tender moments. "You're a good mother," she said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes again. "I don't feel like a good mother," she admitted. "Good mothers don't run out of money for formula. Good mothers don't have to accept charity from strangers." Mrs. Patterson made a dismissive sound. "Good mothers do whatever it takes to care for their children," she said firmly. "Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now, dear. What matters is that Marcus is fed and loved and safe. Everything else is just details." Emma nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She had always been independent, had always prided herself on being able to handle whatever life threw at her. Accepting help, even from someone as kind as David Chun, felt like admitting defeat. As if sensing her thoughts, Mrs. Patterson continued, "I raised 4 children mostly on my own after my husband died. There were times I had to accept help from neighbors, from churches, from strangers who saw a young mother struggling and wanted to lend a hand. It doesn't make you weak, Emma. It makes you human." Emma looked down at Marcus, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. He was so perfect, so trusting, so completely dependent on her too. Make the right decisions for both of them. She couldn't afford to let pride interfere with his well-being. "I just wish I understood why he helped me," Emma said. "David, I mean. People don't usually just offer to buy formula for strangers." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Maybe he's been where you are. Maybe he remembers what it feels like to count coins and hope for miracles. Or maybe he's just a good person who saw someone in need and wanted to help." Emma considered this as she gently rocked Marcus in her arms. She thought about David's expression when he offered to help, the way he had mentioned his own daughter, the genuine kindness in his voice when he said, "Sometimes everyone needs help." Maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe some people really were just good, without hidden agendas or expectations. After a few more minutes of quiet conversation, Emma thanked Mrs. Patterson and carried Marcus upstairs to their own apartment. It was small and sparse, furnished with second-hand items and decorated with photos of Marcus and a few mementos from her mother. But it was clean and safe, and it was theirs. Emma settled Marcus in his crib, watching as he continued to sleep peacefully, his stomach full and his immediate needs met. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worries, new calculations about money and time and how to make everything work. But tonight, thanks to the unexpected kindness of a stranger, her son was fed and content. As Emma got ready for bed, she thought about David Chun and wondered if she would ever see him again. Part of her hoped she would, so she could thank him properly and maybe understand why he had been so generous. Another part of her hoped she wouldn't, because seeing him again would remind her of this moment of desperation and dependence that she would rather forget. But as she lay in bed, listening to Marcus's soft breathing from the crib beside her, Emma found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. If strangers could be kind, if help could appear when she least expected it, maybe her situation wasn't as hopeless as she had believed. Maybe there were people in the world who understood struggle and wanted to help ease it for others. Emma fell asleep thinking about angels among us, about the mysterious ways help could arrive, and about the possibility that tomorrow might bring something better than just another day of survival. For the first time in weeks, her dreams were peaceful, filled with the sound of Marcus's contented breathing and the memory of a stranger's unexpected kindness. 3 days had passed since the grocery store encounter, and Emma found herself thinking about David Chun at the most unexpected moments. While serving coffee to bleary-eyed commuters at the diner, she would catch herself wondering what he did for work, how he had accumulated such obvious wealth, and why he had been shopping alone late at night in a modest neighborhood grocery store when he clearly belonged in more upscale establishments. The morning rush at Sunrise Diner was particularly hectic, with construction workers grabbing quick breakfasts before heading to job sites and office workers ordering elaborate coffee drinks that took precious minutes to prepare. Emma moved efficiently between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with the mechanical precision that came from months of repetition. Her manager, a gruff man named Tony, who had owned the diner for 15 years, appreciated her reliability and work ethic, but he wasn't known for his patience when customers complained or orders got mixed up. Emma was clearing table 6 when she heard a familiar voice ordering at the counter. Her head snapped up, and she saw David Chun standing near the register, dressed in what appeared to be an expensive business suit, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He was ordering black coffee and a blueberry muffin, speaking politely to Maria, the other morning waitress who had a tendency to flirt with attractive male customers. Emma's heart began to race, a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and curiosity flooding through her system. She had imagined this moment, had even rehearsed what she might say if she ever encountered David again. But now that he was actually here, she felt tongue-tied and awkward. She busied herself wiping down the already clean table, trying to decide whether to approach him or simply let him enjoy his breakfast in peace. David received his order and looked around the busy diner for an empty table. His eyes scanned the room systematically, taking in the worn vinyl booths, the faded photographs of local landmarks, and the collection of regular customers who treated the place like their personal breakfast club. When his gaze landed on Emma, his expression brightened with recognition and what appeared to be genuine pleasure. He made his way through the crowded restaurant, navigating between rushing waitresses and early morning diners until he reached the table Emma was still unnecessarily cleaning. She looked up as he approached, her cheeks warming with the familiar heat of embarrassment, mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. "Emma," David said, his voice warm with recognition. "What a pleasant surprise." Emma straightened, smoothing her apron with nervous hands. The uniform was clean but unflattering, a polyester dress in an unappealing shade of blue that made her skin look washed out. She was acutely aware of the contrast between her appearance and David's polished professionalism. "Hi," she managed, her voice barely audible above the diner's breakfast chaos. "I didn't expect to see you here." David smiled, and Emma noticed again how the expression transformed his entire face, making him seem more approachable despite his obvious success. "I had an early meeting nearby," he explained. "Someone recommended this place for authentic breakfast food." Emma glanced around the diner, trying to see it through David's eyes. The linoleum floors were clean but scuffed from years of use. The walls were decorated with local high school sports team photos and faded newspaper clippings about community events. The coffee was good and the portions were generous, but it was hardly the type of establishment where she would expect to find someone of David's apparent social status. "How's Marcus?" David asked, and Emma was surprised that he remembered her son's name. 3 days ago, in the emotional intensity of the grocery store encounter, she hadn't been sure he had been paying attention to personal details. "He's doing well," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength as she talked about her son. "The formula you bought has been perfect for his stomach. He's been sleeping better, eating better. Thank you again for that." David waved off her thanks with the same gesture he had used in the grocery store. "I'm glad to hear he's doing well. How old did you say he was again?" 4 months, Emma answered. "He's starting to smile more, making more sounds. It's amazing how much they change at this age." Something shifted in David's expression, a flicker of emotion that passed too quickly for Emma to interpret. He glanced around the busy diner, then back at Emma. "Are you working a double shift today?" Emma shook her head. "Just the morning shift. I get off at 2. Tony's voice boomed from behind the counter, calling Emma's name with the impatient tone he reserved for employees who were spending too much time chatting with customers. Emma's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety about disappointing her boss and potentially losing one of her 2 sources of income. "I should get back to work," Emma said apologetically, gathering her cleaning supplies. David nodded understandingly. "Of course. I don't want to get you in trouble." Emma hurried back to her other tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups while stealing occasional glances at David. He ate his breakfast slowly, checking his phone periodically and making notes in a leather portfolio that looked expensive, enough to cost more than Emma's monthly rent. She found herself wondering what kind of business required such early morning meetings and whether David's success had come from inheritance or hard work. As the breakfast rush began to wind down, Emma noticed David approaching the counter to pay his check. She was refilling the coffee station when she heard him talking to Maria about the restaurant's hours and regular clientele. Maria, who was notorious for her inability to keep personal information to herself, was happily chatting about the diner's history and the various types of customers they served. "That girl Emma," Maria said, gesturing toward where Emma was working. "She's such a sweet thing. Single mother, works 2 jobs, Never complains about anything. Real tough situation, you know? Emma's face burned with embarrassment as she realized Maria was sharing her personal business with David. She tried to move out of earshot, but the diner's open layout made privacy impossible. David was listening politely, but Emma couldn't tell if he was genuinely interested or simply being courteous to a talkative waitress. "She's a hard worker," David commented, his voice neutral but kind. "Oh, the hardest," Maria continued enthusiastically. "Never calls in sick, always covers shifts. For other people, treats customers like gold, even when they're rude to her. But you can tell she's struggling, you know? Sometimes she brings her own lunch in a paper bag because she can't afford to buy food here. Breaks my heart." Emma wanted to disappear into the floor. Maria's well-intentioned commentary was painting her as a charity case, someone to be pitied rather than respected. She focused intensely on wiping down the coffee machine, hoping David would pay his check and leave before Maria shared any more personal details about her financial situation. David paid his bill and left a generous tip, nodding politely to Maria before heading toward the exit. As he passed the coffee station where Emma was working, he paused and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Emma," he said, "I hope this doesn't seem presumptuous, but I'd like to talk with you about something. Would you be available to meet for coffee sometime?" "Not here," he added quickly. "Somewhere we could have a private conversation." Emma looked up at him, surprised by the request. "What about?" David glanced around the diner, ensuring their conversation remained private. "An opportunity that might interest you." "Nothing inappropriate," he clarified quickly. "Just a business conversation." Emma's mind raced through possibilities, most of them involving scenarios where wealthy men offered struggling single mothers help in exchange for favors she wasn't prepared to provide. Her experience with Marcus's father had taught her to be wary of men who made promises that seemed too good to be true. "What kind of opportunity?" she asked cautiously. David smiled, recognizing her wariness and seeming to respect it. "I'll explain everything when we meet. Would tomorrow afternoon work? There's a coffee shop called Bean there on 5th Street. Very public, very safe." Emma considered the invitation, weighing her natural caution against her curiosity and her desperate need for any legitimate opportunity to improve her situation. David had already proven himself trustworthy by helping with Marcus's formula without expecting anything in return. Perhaps this conversation could lead to something that would help her build a more stable life for her son. "Okay," she said finally. "What time? 3 o'clock? I can work around your schedule if that doesn't work." Emma nodded, already planning how she would arrange childcare with Mrs. Patterson. "I'll be there." David smiled again, and Emma noticed how the expression reached his eyes, creating small lines that suggested someone who smiled often and genuinely. "I'll see you tomorrow then. Have a good rest of your shift." After David left, Emma found herself distracted for the remainder of her morning shift. She mechanically went through the motions of serving customers, clearing tables, and restocking supplies, but her mind was occupied with speculation about what David might want to discuss. Tony noticed her distraction and made a pointed comment about keeping her head in the game, but Emma barely registered the criticism. During her break, Emma called Mrs. Patterson to arrange childcare for the following afternoon. The older woman was happy to watch Marcus as always, but she picked up on Emma's nervous energy during their brief conversation. "Is everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "You sound anxious." Emma explained about David's invitation, carefully omitting Maria's embarrassing commentary about her financial struggles. Mrs. Patterson listened with the patient attention she gave to all of Emma's concerns, offering gentle advice when asked and supportive silence when Emma simply needed to think out loud. "Trust your instincts," Mrs. Patterson said finally. "If something feels wrong, leave immediately. But if he's been kind to you and Marcus without expecting anything in return, maybe he genuinely wants to help." After her shift ended, Emma picked up Marcus from Mrs. Patterson's apartment and spent the afternoon playing with him on the living room floor of their small apartment. He was becoming more interactive each day, reaching for toys with increasing accuracy and making gurgling sounds that Emma chose to interpret as attempts at conversation. She told him about her upcoming meeting with David, speaking to him in the soothing tone she used for all their one-sided conversations. "Mama might have a new opportunity," she said, tickling his feet and smiling when he kicked happily in response. "I don't know what it is yet, but maybe it could help us build a better life. What do you think, sweet boy?" Marcus responded with a series of coos and gurgles that Emma took as enthusiastic approval of any plan that might improve their circumstances. She spent the evening researching David Chun online, using her phone's limited internet connection to search for any information about his background and business activities. What she found was both impressive and somewhat intimidating. David was indeed successful, holding a senior executive position at a major consulting firm that specialized in helping businesses improve their operations and profitability. His LinkedIn profile showed an MBA from a prestigious university and a career trajectory that had taken him from entry-level positions to leadership roles in less than 15 years. There were photos from business conferences and charity events, always showing David in professional settings with other successful-looking people. The information was reassuring in that it confirmed David was legitimate and successful, but it also made Emma wonder why someone with his background and connections would be interested in offering opportunities to a waitress with a high school education and no business experience. She fell asleep that night with more questions than answers, Marcus sleeping peacefully beside her in the small bedroom they shared. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma's morning shift at the diner seemed to last forever, every customer interaction feeling routine and mindless as she anticipated her afternoon meeting. She spilled coffee on her uniform during the lunch rush and had to change into her spare dress, a simple black outfit that was slightly more flattering than her regular uniform, but still clearly marked her as someone who worked in food service. After her shift, Emma hurried home to shower and change clothes. She chose her best outfit, a navy blue dress she had bought for job interviews before Marcus was born. It was professional without being formal, flattering without being inappropriate. She applied a small amount of makeup, just enough to look polished, and pulled her dark hair back into a neat ponytail. Mrs. Patterson was waiting with Marcus when Emma knocked on her door at 2:30. The older woman looked Emma up and down, approvingly, nodding at her careful grooming and professional appearance. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, taking Marcus from Emma's arms. Confident and capable. Emma kissed Marcus goodbye and walked the 6 blocks to Bean There, a coffee shop she had passed many times but never entered. The neighborhood was slightly more upscale than where she lived, with trendy boutiques and restaurants that catered to young professionals and college students. The coffee shop itself was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, comfortable seating areas, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Emma arrived exactly at 3 o'clock, her punctuality a habit formed by years of service industry. Jobs where being late meant lost income. She scanned the interior and spotted David sitting at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee already waiting. He stood as she approached, extending his hand in greeting with the same professional courtesy he had shown at the diner. "Emma, thank you for coming," David said as they both settled into comfortable chairs. "I hope you don't mind that I ordered for you. Black coffee seemed safe, but I can get you something else if you prefer." Emma appreciated that he had remembered how she drank her coffee at the diner. It was a small detail, but it suggested he paid attention to people and their preferences. "Black coffee is perfect, thank you." David was dressed more casually than he had been at the diner, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that was obviously expensive, but not intimidatingly formal. Emma found herself feeling slightly more at ease, though her curiosity about his mysterious opportunity was making her hands shake slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked to meet with you," David began, his tone professional but warm. "I hope you'll hear me out completely before you respond." Emma nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup to steady them. David leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. "First, I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you is completely legitimate. I'm not offering anything inappropriate, and I'm not expecting anything from you, except honest work." The disclaimer was reassuring, though it also made Emma more curious about what exactly he was proposing. She waited for him to continue, trying to appear calm and professional despite her racing heart. "My consulting firm works with businesses to improve their operations," David explained. "Part of what we do involves understanding the customer experience from the ground up. We need people who can observe workplace dynamics, customer interactions, and operational inefficiencies from the perspective of frontline employees." Emma nodded, following his explanation but not yet understanding how it related to her. "We're looking for someone to work with us on a project involving restaurant and hospitality businesses," David continued. "Someone who understands the service industry from personal experience, who can observe and analyze operations without being obvious about it." Emma felt a flicker of understanding, though she wasn't sure she was interpreting his meaning correctly. "You're talking about some kind of undercover work?" David smiled at her quick comprehension. "Exactly. We call them operational assessments. You would be hired by restaurants and other service businesses as a regular employee, but you would also be observing and reporting on various aspects of their operations. Training procedures, customer service protocols, efficiency issues, employee morale, that sort of thing." Emma's mind was racing, trying to process this unexpected opportunity. "And you think I would be good at this because I already work in restaurants?" "That's part of it," David confirmed. "But there's more to it than just industry experience. This work requires someone who's observant, detail-oriented, and capable of written communication. It requires someone who can blend in naturally in service environments and interact authentically with both customers and fellow employees." Emma felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in months: professional excitement. The opportunity David was describing sounded challenging and interesting, completely different from the routine tasks that filled her current work days. What would the pay be like? David named a figure that made Emma's coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. It was more than she currently made from both her jobs combined, and it was for work that sounded far more engaging than serving eggs and cleaning office buildings. "I know it probably sounds too good to be true," David said, correctly interpreting her shocked expression. "But this is legitimate work that requires specific skills. You'd be providing valuable services to businesses that need to understand their operations better." Emma set down her coffee cup, her mind spinning with possibilities. The salary David had mentioned would allow her to quit both her current jobs, spend more time with Marcus, maybe even start saving money for the first time since he was born. But opportunities that seemed too good to be true usually were, and Emma had learned to be cautious about promises that offered easy solutions to complex problems. "Why me?" Emma asked. "I mean, there must be other people with restaurant experience who could do this work." David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Honestly, I've been watching you work at the diner for the past few weeks." Emma's eyes widened with surprise and a flicker of alarm. "Watching me?" David raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Not in a creepy way," he said quickly. "I've been eating breakfast there regularly because it's convenient to my office, and I've observed how you interact with customers, how you handle difficult situations, how you work with your colleagues. You have natural skills that would translate well to this type of work." Emma wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned that David had been observing her without her knowledge. "What kind of natural skills?" "You notice things," David explained. When a customer is dissatisfied, you pick up on it immediately and find ways to address their concerns. When the kitchen is running behind, you adjust your service style to manage customer expectations. When your coworkers are struggling, you help them without being asked. Those are exactly the kinds of observational and interpersonal skills that make someone successful in operational assessment work. Emma considered this, trying to view her work habits through David's analytical lens. She had always prided herself on being good at her job, on anticipating problems and finding solutions. But she had never thought of these abilities as particularly special or valuable outside the service industry. There would be training, of course, David continued, both in assessment techniques and in report writing. And you'd have support from our team throughout each assignment. Emma felt a growing excitement about the possibility, but her natural caution kept her from agreeing immediately. What would this mean for my current jobs? I can't afford to quit without having something definite lined up. David nodded approvingly at her practical concern. We would start with a trial assignment while you're still working your current jobs. If it goes well for both of us, we would offer you a full-time position with benefits. If it doesn't work out, you haven't lost anything. The proposal was sounding more reasonable and less risky with each detail David provided. Emma found herself genuinely considering the opportunity, imagining what it would be like to have work that challenged her intellectually while still drawing on her existing skills and experience. What would the trial assignment involve? Emma asked. David pulled out a folder from his briefcase and extracted several documents. There's a mid-scale restaurant chain called Harvest Kitchen that's been experiencing declining customer satisfaction scores and increasing employee turnover. They've hired us to identify operational issues and recommend improvements. Emma had heard of Harvest Kitchen, a farm-to-table concept with several locations around the city. She had considered applying for work there in the past but had been intimidated by their reputation for high standards and competitive hiring practices. You would be hired as a server at their downtown location, David explained. The manager there has been told to expect a new employee, but he doesn't know about the assessment component. You would work regular shifts, earn regular wages from them, but you would also be observing and documenting various aspects of their operations. Emma studied the documents David had provided, which included detailed information about Harvest Kitchen's business model, their current challenges, and the specific areas where operational assessment was needed. The work seemed complex and important, far more intellectually engaging than anything she had done since high school. How long would the assignment last? Emma asked. Typically 4 to 6 weeks, David replied. Long enough to observe patterns and seasonal variations, but not so long that it becomes obvious you're there for reasons other than regular employment. Emma's mind was racing through practical considerations. 4 to 6 weeks would give her time to evaluate the opportunity thoroughly while maintaining her current income sources. If the work went well, she could transition to full-time assessment work. If it didn't, she would still have her regular jobs to fall back on. I'd need to arrange childcare, Emma said, thinking out loud. The hours at Harvest Kitchen might be different from what I'm working now. David nodded understandingly. That's something we can help with. Part of our support for assessment workers includes assistance with practical arrangements like childcare and transportation. Emma looked up sharply. You would help pay for childcare? Within reason, yes, David confirmed. We recognize that people with the skills we need often have other responsibilities. We try to remove practical barriers that might prevent good candidates from taking on this work. Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. For months, she had felt trapped by the circular logic of her situation. She needed better work to afford better childcare, but she needed better childcare to be available for better work. David's offer seemed to break that cycle by addressing both sides of the equation simultaneously. This really sounds too good to be true, Emma said, her voice shaky with emotion and disbelief. David's expression grew more serious. Emma, I want to be completely honest with you about why I'm offering you this opportunity. Emma braced herself, expecting him to reveal some hidden agenda or ulterior motive that would explain his seemingly excessive generosity. I told you I have a daughter, David said. What I didn't mention is that her mother and I aren't together anymore. We divorced when Sarah was 2 years old. Emma nodded, not sure where this revelation was leading, but grateful for David's transparency. After the divorce, I watched Sarah's mother struggle with many of the same challenges you're facing, David continued. Working multiple jobs, worrying about childcare, trying to build a stable life while dealing with financial stress. I helped financially, of course, but I couldn't fix the fundamental problem of limited opportunities for advancement. Emma began to understand the personal connection David felt to her situation. When I saw you in the grocery store, when I watched you work at the diner, it reminded me of what Sarah's mother went through, David explained. I have the resources and connections to create opportunities that might make a real difference in someone's life. It seems like a waste not to use those advantages to help when I can. Emma studied David's face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but finding only genuine concern and what appeared to be respect for her work ethic and capabilities. So this is charity? Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. David shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. This is a business opportunity that benefits both of us. We need someone with your skills and experience for this work. The fact that it also happens to address some of your personal challenges is a bonus, but it's not the primary motivation. Emma considered this explanation, trying to separate her emotional reactions from her practical analysis of the opportunity. The work David described sounded legitimate and valuable. The compensation was generous but not unreasonably so for skilled consulting work. The trial arrangement minimized her risk while allowing both parties to evaluate the fit. What happens if the trial assignment goes well? Emma asked. What would full-time work look like? David's expression brightened, clearly pleased that Emma was seriously considering the opportunity. You would become a permanent member of our assessment team. There would be regular assignments with different types of businesses opportunities. For advancement, health insurance, paid vacation, all the benefits of professional employment. Emma's heart raced as she imagined the possibility of professional stability, of work that challenged and respected her abilities, of being able to provide for Marcus without constant financial anxiety. I'd like to think about it, Emma said carefully. This is a big decision, and I want to make sure I'm considering all the implications. David nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thoughtful approach that makes me confident you'd be good at this work. Take whatever time you need. The Harvest Kitchen assignment can start whenever you're ready. David gathered his documents and returned them to his briefcase, but he didn't make any move to leave. Instead, he looked at Emma with an expression that seemed to combine professional respect with personal concern. Can I ask you something? David said. And please feel free not to answer if it's too personal. Emma nodded, curious about what he wanted to know. What are your long-term goals? I mean, what would you like your life to look like in 5 years? The question caught Emma off guard. She had been so focused on day-to-day survival that she hadn't allowed herself to think much about long-term possibilities. Dreams felt like luxury she couldn't afford when she was constantly worried about immediate needs. I'd like Marcus to have opportunities I didn't have, Emma said slowly, formulating her thoughts as she spoke. I'd like him to grow up knowing that education is important, that he can choose his path in life instead of just reacting to circumstances. David nodded encouragingly. What about for yourself? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking about dreams she had put aside when her mother got sick, when she became pregnant, when life became a series of crises to manage rather than goals to pursue. I'd like to do work that matters, she said finally. Something that uses my mind, not just my ability to carry plates and smile at customers. I'd like to be able to provide for Marcus without constantly worrying about money. I'd like to feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving. David smiled, and Emma could see approval and encouragement in his expression. Those are good goals, he said, and they're achievable with the right opportunities. Emma felt a surge of hope and determination that she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Marcus was born, she could envision a future that involved more than just getting by, more than just hoping to make it through each month, without falling further behind. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision, Emma said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. David stood and extended his hand in farewell. I hope you'll decide to give it a try. I think you might surprise yourself with what you're capable of accomplishing. Emma walked home from the coffee shop with her mind buzzing with possibilities and questions. The practical part of her brain was already calculating how the new work arrangement would affect her schedule, her childcare needs, and her overall financial situation. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for too long, was excited about the intellectual challenge and professional growth that David's opportunity represented. Mrs. Patterson was waiting with Marcus when Emma returned, and the older woman immediately noticed the change in Emma's demeanor. Instead of the exhausted resignation that usually characterized Emma's return from work or errands, she seemed energized and hopeful. How did your meeting go, dear? Mrs. Patterson asked as Emma took Marcus into her arms and kissed his forehead. Emma told Mrs. Patterson about David's offer, carefully explaining the details and her own mixed feelings about the opportunity. Mrs. Patterson listened with her usual patient attention, asking thoughtful questions and offering gentle observations about the potential benefits and risks. It sounds like this young man sees potential in you that you might not see in yourself, Mrs. Patterson said when Emma finished explaining. Sometimes we need other people to help us recognize our own capabilities. Emma spent the evening playing with Marcus and thinking about David's offer. She made lists of pros and cons, calculated potential income changes, and researched Harvest Kitchen online to learn more about the company where she might be working. Everything she learned reinforced her growing conviction that this opportunity was exactly what she needed to break out of the cycle of financial insecurity and limited options that had defined her life since Marcus was born. That night, as she lay in bed listening to Marcus's peaceful breathing, Emma allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future. A future where she had professional respect, financial stability, and work that challenged her intellect. A future where Marcus could grow up watching his mother succeed at meaningful work instead of just struggling to survive. For the first time in months, Emma fell asleep feeling excited about tomorrow instead of dreading it. Emma's first day at Harvest Kitchen arrived faster than she had anticipated. After spending 2 sleepless nights weighing her options, she had called David to accept his offer, and within 48 hours she found herself standing outside the restaurant's gleaming downtown location, wearing a crisp white shirt and black slacks that David's company had provided as part of her server uniform. The restaurant was everything she had imagined from their website and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed natural light to flood the dining room, highlighting exposed wooden beams and living plant walls that gave the space an organic, upscale atmosphere. The open kitchen design allowed diners to watch chefs preparing meals with ingredients that were displayed like artwork on marble countertops. Everything about Harvest Kitchen spoke of quality, sophistication, and prices that were well beyond Emma's usual dining budget. Emma checked in with the hostess, a perfectly groomed young woman named Stephanie, who looked like she had stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Stephanie's smile was professional but cool as she directed Emma to wait in the employee break room for the manager. Emma couldn't help but notice the difference between this polished environment and the worn comfort of Sunrise Diner, where coffee stains on the walls were considered character and customers were more likely to be construction workers than wine enthusiasts. The break room was clean and modern, with motivational posters about teamwork and customer service decorating the walls. Emma sat at a small table, trying to calm her nerves while reviewing the mental notes she had prepared about her cover story. According to the background David had helped her create, she was a server with experience at family restaurants who was looking to transition into fine dining. It was close enough to the truth to feel natural while hiding the real purpose of her employment. Marcus had spent the morning with Mrs. Patterson, who had been thrilled to learn about Emma's new opportunity and had insisted on watching the baby without any compensation. Emma had left detailed instructions about feeding schedules and emergency contacts, though she trusted Mrs. Patterson's experience with children more than her own. Still, being away from Marcus during the day felt strange and anxiety-inducing, even though she knew he was in loving hands. The manager, a thin man in his early 40s named Richard Blackwell, entered the break room carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that suggested he took his responsibilities very seriously. His dark hair was styled with the kind of precision that required daily attention, and his pressed shirt showed no evidence of the kitchen chaos that Emma knew existed just beyond the dining room doors. "Emma Rodriguez," Richard said, extending his hand in greeting. "Welcome to the Harvest Kitchen family. I'm Richard, the general manager here." Emma shook his hand, noting his firm grip and the way his eyes assessed her appearance and demeanor. She had the distinct impression that Richard was the type of manager who noticed everything and forgot nothing, which could either be helpful or problematic for her secret assessment work. "Thank you for the opportunity," Emma replied, trying to strike the right balance between enthusiasm and professionalism. "I'm excited to learn about fine dining service." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's what I like to hear. We pride ourselves on providing an exceptional dining experience, which means every team member needs to be committed to excellence." He launched into a detailed explanation of Harvest Kitchen's philosophy, their commitment to locally sourced ingredients, and their reputation for superior customer service. Emma listened carefully, taking mental notes not just about the information Richard was sharing, but about his management style and the way he talked about employees and customers. Richard's approach seemed to combine genuine passion for the restaurant, business with an almost military attention to detail. He spoke about service standards as if they were matters of life and death, and Emma could sense that working for him would be demanding in ways that went beyond anything she had experienced. At the diner, "Your training will start today with shadowing one of our experienced servers," Richard explained. "Jessica Martinez has been with us for 3 years and knows our systems inside and out. She'll show you the ropes and evaluate your progress." Emma was relieved to learn that she wouldn't be thrown immediately into solo service, especially in such an upscale environment where mistakes could be more costly and embarrassing than at the diner. She followed Richard into the main dining room, where the lunch prep was already underway despite the early morning hour. The kitchen was visible through large glass panels, and Emma could see chefs in pristine white coats arranging ingredients with the precision of artists. The dining room staff moved with choreographed efficiency, setting tables with multiple sets of silverware and wine glasses that caught the morning light like crystal sculptures. Everything about the operation spoke of systems and standards that had been refined through careful attention to detail. Jessica Martinez turned out to be a woman in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and the confident bearing of someone who had mastered her craft. She greeted Emma with a warm smile that seemed more genuine than Stephanie's professional politeness, and Emma felt some of her nervousness begin to ease. "Don't look so terrified," Jessica said with a laugh as they walked toward the server station. "It's just food service, even if the plates cost more than most people's car payments." Emma appreciated Jessica's humor and directness. "I'm just nervous about making mistakes in such a nice place." Jessica nodded understandingly. "Everyone feels that way at first. The key is to remember that our customers are still just people who want good food and good service. The fancy atmosphere doesn't change the basics. Jessica began Emma's training by explaining Harvest Kitchen's service philosophy, which emphasized anticipating customer needs rather than simply responding to requests. Servers were expected to notice when water glasses needed refilling, when customers seemed ready to order, and when meals were taking longer than expected to arrive from the kitchen. Richard calls it invisible service, Jessica explained as. They reviewed the restaurant's extensive wine list. The goal is to make everything seem effortless for the customer, even though there's actually a lot of planning and coordination happening behind the scenes. Emma found herself genuinely impressed by the complexity of fine dining service. At the diner, customer interactions were straightforward. Take orders, deliver food, refill coffee, clear tables. At Harvest Kitchen, servers were expected to act as consultants, educators, and coordinators, guiding customers through menu selections and wine pairings while managing multiple tables with different timing needs. The training materials included detailed information about ingredient sourcing, preparation methods, and flavor profiles for every dish on the menu. Servers were expected to answer questions about dietary restrictions, cooking techniques, and wine pairings with the expertise of culinary professionals. Emma realized that succeeding in this environment would require a level of knowledge and skill that went far beyond her previous restaurant experience. As the morning progressed, Emma began to understand why David had thought she would be well suited for operational assessment work. The complexity of Harvest Kitchen's operations created numerous opportunities for breakdowns in communication, coordination, and customer service. She found herself naturally observing the interactions between kitchen staff and servers, noting moments when information didn't flow smoothly between departments. During the lunch rush, Emma shadowed Jessica while serving the busy section of 6 tables. She watched carefully as Jessica managed customer requests, coordinated with the kitchen staff, and maintained the calm professional demeanor that Harvest Kitchen's upscale clientele expected. Emma was impressed by Jessica's skill, but also noticed several areas where operational inefficiencies were creating stress for both staff and customers. The kitchen was running behind schedule due to a problem with one of the ovens, but this information wasn't being communicated effectively to the servers. Emma watched as Jessica had to make multiple trips to the kitchen to check on order status, time that could have been spent providing better service to customers. Meanwhile, customers were becoming impatient without understanding the reason for delays. Emma also noticed that the restaurant's point-of-sale system seemed outdated and cumbersome, requiring servers to navigate through multiple screens to place orders and make modifications. This technological inefficiency was particularly problematic during busy periods when speed and accuracy were essential. The break room conversations revealed additional operational challenges. Emma listened as servers complained about inconsistent scheduling, inadequate training for new menu items, and communication problems between the management team and front-of-house staff. These issues weren't necessarily visible to customers, but they were clearly affecting employee morale and efficiency. By the end of her first shift, Emma was exhausted but exhilarated. The work was more demanding than anything she had done before, but it was also more intellectually engaging. She found herself energized by the challenge of learning new skills and systems, even as she was quietly documenting the operational issues she had observed. Richard called Emma into his office at the end of the day for a brief evaluation of her first shift. His office was small but well organized, with certificates and awards covering one wall and a large calendar covering another. Emma noticed that the calendar was marked with different colored pens, suggesting a manager who tracked multiple systems and deadlines simultaneously. "How do you feel about your first day?" Richard asked, settling behind his desk with the same serious expression he had worn during their morning introduction. Emma chose her words carefully, wanting to seem enthusiastic without appearing overconfident. It was challenging but exciting. There's definitely a lot to learn, but I'm looking forward to developing these new skills. Richard nodded approvingly. Jessica spoke highly of your attitude and your ability to pick up new information quickly. That's exactly what we're looking for in our team members. Emma felt a flush of pride at the positive feedback. It had been a long time since she had received recognition for her professional abilities, rather than just her reliability and work ethic. I do want to mention, Richard continued, that we have high standards here. Customers pay premium prices and expect premium service. There's no room for the kind of casual approach that might work in other restaurant environments. Emma nodded. Seriously, I understand completely. I want to meet those standards. Richard's expression softened slightly. I think you will. You seem to have the right combination of attention to detail and customer service instincts. We'll continue your training tomorrow with some focus on wine service and menu knowledge. Emma left Harvest Kitchen feeling cautiously optimistic about her ability to succeed in this new environment. The work was demanding, but it was also the kind of professional challenge she had been craving without knowing it. For the first time in years, she felt like she was developing new skills rather than just repeating familiar tasks. Mrs. Patterson was waiting with Marcus when Emma returned home, and the older woman was eager to hear about her first day in the new job. Emma found herself talking enthusiastically about the restaurant's operations, the complexity of fine dining service, and the sense of accomplishment she felt from mastering new challenges. You sound happy, Mrs. Patterson observed as Emma took Marcus into her arms and settled into the comfortable chair where she usually fed him his evening bottle. It's been a long time since I've heard that kind of excitement in your voice when you talked about work. Emma realized that Mrs. Patterson was right. For months, work had been something she endured rather than enjoyed, a necessary means of survival rather than a source of satisfaction. The shift in her attitude was subtle but significant, and it gave her hope that David's opportunity might represent a real turning point in her life. That evening, Emma called David to report on her first day and share her initial observations about Harvest Kitchen's operations. David listened carefully to her detailed account, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes about the issues she had identified. You're picking up on exactly the kinds of operational challenges that our clients need to understand, David told her. The communication breakdowns between kitchen and service staff, the technology inefficiencies, the scheduling problems, these are all areas where improvements could significantly impact both customer satisfaction and employee retention. Emma felt validated by David's positive response to her observations. She had been worried that her lack of formal business training would limit her ability to identify meaningful operational issues, but her frontline experience seemed to provide valuable insights that were useful for assessment purposes. How are you feeling about the work environment? David asked. Is it manageable alongside your responsibilities with Marcus? Emma appreciated David's continued concern for her personal situation. The childcare arrangements were working well so far, and the higher wages from Harvest Kitchen meant she could afford to quit her evening cleaning job, giving her more time at home with Marcus. It's going well, Emma replied. The work is demanding, but it's also rewarding in ways I hadn't expected. I'm learning a lot. David's voice carried a note of satisfaction. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Professional growth is just as important as financial stability. As Emma prepared for bed that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. The desperate woman counting coins in the grocery store seemed like a different person, someone whose problems belonged to the past rather than the present. She still faced challenges, and Marcus's long-term security was far from guaranteed. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was moving forward rather than just treading water. The next few days at Harvest Kitchen followed a similar pattern of intensive training, combined with careful observation of operational dynamics. Emma worked with different experienced servers, learning the nuances of wine service, food presentation, and customer relationship management. Each day brought new challenges and new insights into the complex systems that kept an upscale restaurant functioning. Emma's assessment notes grew longer and more detailed as she identified patterns in the operational challenges she observed. The kitchen staff's morale seemed to fluctuate based on Richard's management style, which could be supportive and encouraging one day and critical and demanding the next. The scheduling system created unnecessary stress for servers who couldn't predict their hours from week to week. The training program for new employees was thorough but overwhelming, leading to high turnover among new hires who became discouraged before mastering the required skills. On Thursday of her first week, Emma experienced her first real crisis at Harvest Kitchen. A large party of business executives had reserved the private dining room for an important client dinner, and everything that could go wrong seemed to happen simultaneously. The specialized menu items they had pre-ordered included ingredients that hadn't been delivered due to a supplier problem. The sommelier called in sick, leaving wine service to servers who were less familiar with the extensive wine list. And the restaurant's reservation system double-booked 2 tables, creating a seating crisis during the busy dinner rush. Emma watched as Richard tried to manage multiple crises while maintaining the calm professionalism that Harvest Kitchen's reputation required. She saw servers making heroic efforts to provide excellent service despite impossible circumstances, and kitchen staff working overtime to prepare substitute dishes that would meet the private party's expectations. The evening was a masterclass in crisis management, but it also revealed significant weaknesses in Harvest Kitchen's operational systems. Emma realized that the restaurant's high standards and complex operations made it particularly vulnerable to the kind of cascading failures that had occurred that night. Despite the chaos, the private party dinner was ultimately successful, and the business executives left satisfied with their dining experience. But Emma could see the toll the evening had taken on the staff, and she noticed that several servers were talking quietly about looking for other jobs where the stress levels might be more manageable. Emma's detailed notes about the crisis and its underlying causes would become some of the most valuable material in her assessment report. She had observed firsthand how operational weaknesses that seemed minor during normal operations could become major problems during periods of high stress or unexpected challenges. By Friday evening, Emma felt confident that she had gathered enough information to provide David and his consulting firm with a comprehensive analysis of Harvest Kitchen's operational strengths and weaknesses. She had identified specific areas where improvements could reduce staff stress, improve customer satisfaction, and increase operational efficiency. More importantly, Emma had discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the analytical aspects of assessment work. Observing workplace dynamics, identifying systemic problems, and developing potential solutions engaged her intellect in ways that routine service work never had. She found herself looking forward to discussing her findings with David and learning about how her observations would be translated into actionable recommendations for Harvest Kitchen's management. As she prepared to leave Harvest Kitchen after her final training shift, Jessica approached her with a warm smile and an envelope containing her training evaluation. "Richard wanted me to give you this," Jessica said. "He's really impressed with how quickly you've picked everything up. He's hoping you'll be interested in taking on some additional responsibilities once you're fully trained." Emma accepted the envelope with mixed feelings. Richard's positive evaluation was gratifying, but she knew that her time at Harvest Kitchen was meant to be temporary. In a few weeks, she would need to leave this job to move on to her next assessment assignment, and she realized that she would miss the challenge and camaraderie of working in such a professional environment. That evening, Emma met David at the same coffee shop where he had first explained the assessment opportunity. She brought with her a detailed written report summarizing her observations and recommendations, the first formal business document she had ever produced. David reviewed her report carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional details about specific incidents she had described. Emma found herself feeling nervous about his evaluation of her work, realizing that her success in this trial assignment would determine whether she could continue with assessment work or would need to return to her previous jobs. "This is excellent work," David said finally, setting down her report with an expression of genuine satisfaction. "You've identified the key operational issues and provided specific examples that illustrate how these problems affect both staff and customers. This is exactly the kind of analysis our clients need." Emma felt a surge of professional pride that was unlike anything she had experienced before. Her ideas and observations were being taken seriously by someone who understood business operations at a sophisticated level. The validation was both exciting and empowering. "So what happens next?" Emma asked. David smiled. "Next, we offer you a permanent position with our assessment team. If you're interested, your next assignment would start in 2 weeks, giving you time to transition out of Harvest Kitchen and prepare for a different type of business environment." Emma's heart raced with excitement and possibility. The future that had seemed so uncertain just a few weeks ago was suddenly filled with professional opportunities and financial stability. But even as she celebrated this success, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if things were moving too quickly, if opportunities this good usually came with hidden costs or unexpected complications. "I'm definitely interested," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "What would the next assignment involve?" 6 months later, Emma sat in the sleek conference room of David's consulting firm, presenting her analysis of a luxury hotel chain to a room full of executives. Her voice was steady and confident as she outlined operational inefficiencies and recommended solutions that could save the company millions in lost revenue. The shy waitress who had once trembled while counting coins for baby formula had transformed into a respected business consultant. Marcus, now 10 months old, was thriving in the daycare program that David's company sponsored for employees with young children. Emma could see him through the glass partition that separated the conference room from the employee childcare center, happily playing with toys that were far more sophisticated than anything she could have afforded on her previous salary. As Emma concluded her presentation, the hotel executives nodded approvingly and began discussing implementation timelines for her recommendations. She felt the familiar surge of professional satisfaction that had become addictive over the past months. Each successful assignment built her confidence and expanded her skills in ways she had never imagined possible. After the meeting, David approached Emma with the warm smile that had become familiar over their months of working together. "Outstanding presentation," he said. "The hotel group is already talking about bringing us back for additional consulting work." Emma packed her presentation materials into the leather briefcase that had been one of her first purchases after receiving her permanent position offer. The briefcase was a symbol of her transformation from someone who struggled to afford basic necessities to someone who commanded respect in professional environments. "I have something I want to discuss with you," David said as they walked toward his office. "There's an opportunity coming up that I think you'd be perfect for, but it would require some significant changes." Emma settled into the comfortable chair across from David's desk, the same seat where they had first discussed her permanent employment 6 months ago. The office felt familiar now, a place where she had celebrated successes and planned new challenges with someone who had become both a mentor and a friend. "What kind of opportunity?" Emma asked, though she was prepared for almost anything after the remarkable journey her career had taken. David leaned forward with the serious expression he wore when discussing important business matters. "We're opening a new regional office in Portland, and we need someone to lead the operational assessment division there. It would mean relocating, but it would also mean a significant promotion and the chance to build a team from the ground up." Emma's mind raced through the implications of such a move. Portland would mean leaving Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had become like a grandmother, To Marcus, it would mean starting over in a new city, building new relationships, and taking on responsibilities that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The position comes with a substantial salary increase, David continued, plus relocation, assistance and help finding housing and childcare in Portland. You'd have the autonomy to hire your own team and develop assessment protocols based on everything you've learned here. Emma looked through the office window at Marcus, who was now pulling himself up to standing position while holding onto the child care center's play equipment. He was growing so quickly, developing new skills and personality traits that amazed her daily. The thought of providing him with even better opportunities was appealing, but the idea of leaving their support system was daunting. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said, turning back to David. "Why me? 6 months ago, I was counting coins for baby formula, and now you're offering me a leadership position. It feels like too much, too fast." David was quiet for a moment, and Emma recognized the thoughtful expression he wore when choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember what I told you about my daughter Sarah?" Emma nodded, recalling his mention of his ex-wife's struggles as a single mother. "What I didn't tell you," David said, "is that Sarah died 2 years ago. Leukemia. She was only 5 years old." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She had assumed David's daughter was still alive, still part of his motivation for helping single mothers like herself. "After Sarah died, I realized that all the money and success in the world doesn't matter if you can't use it to make a difference." David continued, "I started looking for ways to create opportunities for people who reminded me of Sarah's mother, women who were struggling but had potential that wasn't being recognized." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes as she understood the depth of David's loss and the personal meaning behind his generosity. "You weren't charity, Emma," David said firmly. "You've proven that with every successful assignment, every insightful analysis, every professional milestone you've achieved. But I won't lie and say that helping you didn't help me heal from losing Sarah." Emma wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by the revelation and by gratitude for the man who had seen potential in her when she couldn't see it in herself. "The Portland position is yours if you want it," David said. "But I want you to know that whatever you decide, you've already succeeded beyond anything I imagined when I first offered to buy that formula." Emma looked again at Marcus, who was now clapping his hands and babbling happily to one of the childcare workers. He would never remember the desperate nights when she worried about his next meal, the anxiety-filled days when she counted every penny, or the moment when a stranger's kindness changed the trajectory of their lives. "I'll take the Portland position," Emma said, her voice steady with decision. "But I want to do something first." David raised an eyebrow curiously. "I want to establish a program here," Emma explained. "Something that helps other single mothers transition into professional careers. I know what it feels like to be trapped by circumstances, and I want to create opportunities for women who are where I was 6 months ago." David's smile was brilliant with approval and pride. "I think that's a perfect way to honor both your journey and Sarah's memory." 3 months later, Emma stood in the grocery store where everything had begun, but this time she was there by choice rather than desperation. She had returned to town to launch the Professional Pathways program, which would provide career training and support for single mothers transitioning from service jobs to professional careers. The program's first participant was Maria, a young mother Emma had met at Sunrise Diner who reminded her of herself just months earlier. Emma watched as Maria selected groceries without checking prices, her face free from the anxiety that had once consumed Emma during similar shopping trips. As Emma checked out her own groceries, she noticed a young woman at the next register counting coins for infant diapers, her hands trembling with the familiar combination of exhaustion and desperation. Emma recognized the look in the woman's eyes, the same expression she had worn during her darkest moments. Without hesitation, Emma approached the cashier and quietly asked to pay for the woman's purchase. The young mother looked up with surprise and gratitude, tears forming in her eyes as Emma handed her a business card for the Professional Pathways program. "Sometimes we all need a little help," Emma said, repeating the words David had spoken to her in this same store nearly a year ago. "And sometimes that help can change everything." Emma left the store with Marcus in her arms and a heart full of purpose. The scared young woman who had once stood in these aisles counting coins had become someone who could offer hope to others facing similar struggles. It was the kind of transformation that happened when opportunities met determination, when kindness created ripples that extended far beyond a single moment of need. The Portland office was waiting, along with new challenges and new opportunities, to make a difference. But Emma knew that no matter how far her career took her, she would never forget the grocery store encounter that had changed not just her life, but her understanding of how random acts of kindness could create lasting change. Marcus babbled happily as they walked to their car, blissfully unaware that his mother had once worried about affording his next meal. Instead, he would grow up knowing that his mother was someone who helped other people build better lives, someone who had turned her own struggles into a source of strength and purpose. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes strangers become the catalyst for transformations that extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Emma's story had begun with desperation and a wrong number, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the power of recognizing potential, offering opportunity, and believing that everyone deserves a chance to build something better. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.